Why settle for regular salsa when you can eat salsa that's alive? This fermented version isn't just delicious, it's packed with gut-friendly probiotics and takes less than 10 minutes to make. And if you're curious how it stacks up against sauerkraut for probiotics, I'll break that down too. Let's make some salsa. You can use whatever salsa ingredients you like. I'm gonna throw everything on a scale, but if you don't have one, don't worry, I'll give you some tips for estimating later. And I'll link a recipe for you in the description box below if you like measuring. But because I don't, all I'm gonna do is zero out my bowl and throw in a few ingredients. I've got some tomatoes here. Use whatever kind of tomatoes you want. I happen to find some cherry tomatoes on sale, so that's what I'm using today. I've got some chopped onion, garlic, and green bell pepper. Feel free to use a spicier pepper like jalapeno, serrano, whatever you want if you like things spicy. And then I'm gonna squeeze in the juice of about 1.5 limes. And now I'm gonna make a 2% salt brine. 2% is plenty for a short ferment like this. We're only gonna ferment for a few days. And it's not too much that your salsa is gonna taste like ocean water. So now I will multiply the weight in grams, which is 518 grams, times 0.02 for 2% salt brine, which gives me 10.36 grams of salt. I'm just gonna round up to 11 grams of salt. So that's what I'm gonna go ahead and put in. Zero out your scale again, throw in your salt. Use any old salt, just make sure it's free of iodine and anti-caking ingredients. And at this point, you could totally throw your salsa into a food processor if you want it to be nice and creamy, but I'm just gonna leave mine chunky. And if you're not using a scale, you'll probably need about 2 teaspoons of salt per quart of salsa if it's not fully packed to the top, maybe closer to 3 teaspoons if it is really fully packed. It's not the end of the world if you don't have a scale, as long as you make sure to salt your salsa enough, but it is really helpful to have one. Salt's just important because it creates an environment that discourages harmful bacteria while allowing your lactic acid bacteria to thrive. But keep in mind, too much salt can slow down or even stop fermentation, so don't go crazy. I'm gonna give all of this a quick mix and then throw it into preferably a sterilized glass jar. If you have a funnel the right size, this could go a little bit faster, but I don't. All right, so then you wanna really pack this down as much as possible. If you blended this in a food processor, it will not be as easy to do, but that's okay. The idea is to push all this down and keep it underneath the liquid. So I'm gonna squeeze a little bit of liquid out of these tomatoes to make that happen a little bit more easily. So if you have one, you can use a fermentation weight. And as you can see, that will weigh the ingredients down and keep the liquid floating above them, more or less. But still some pieces are gonna float up. So if you really wanna be careful, you could take a cabbage leaf and throw that in first to keep little pieces from floating up. You could use a different kind of leaf. You could use a kale leaf. You could use Swiss chard leaf, whatever, but it might impart a little bit of flavor onto your salsa. So cabbage leaf is a good one and it doesn't break down easily, so. And then your fermentation weight goes on top. And I'm not a big fan of making a homemade fermentation weight out of plastic or something like that, because just remember, this ferment is going to become really acidic. And plastic that's sitting in an acidic environment, which is why I also like to use a glass jar, means potential leaching of whatever plastics and chemicals into your ferment. Okay, so say you don't have a fermentation weight or a piece of cabbage, that's fine. Don't use anything, because the good thing about this is we're not going to ferment it that long. So the chances of mold are low. And as long as you keep your eyes on it, and if you see stuff floating up, take a spoon and push it down. Or if you've blended this already and it's just all going to float up, just stir it a couple times a day to make sure that nothing stays sitting on the top exposed to air. And then I just cover loosely with my lid. I don't screw it on or anything, just like that. And we'll let this ferment at room temperature for approximately 2 to 3 days. My house is usually in the low 70s, for example, and generally 3 days is my perfect amount, because at 2 days, it tastes really great, but I don't feel like there's a lot of fermentation happening. And by the 3rd day, it's nice and bubbly. It tastes a little bit more tangy, but I like to have the balance of flavor and the fermentation benefits. So that's what I do. You'll gauge that yourself. You'll know that the salsa is ready when you start to see bubbles coming up and it's looking active, and also taste it so that you can determine when it's tangy enough enough for your liking. And then once it's ready, you're gonna throw it into the refrigerator. This salsa will last for months in the refrigerator, although it will continue to slowly ferment and you probably won't like the taste after too long. This, however, has been in my fridge for probably a week or so, and it still tastes wonderful. And you can see how bubbly it is. Let's give it a taste. If you know me well, which most of you do not, I pretty much will never say no to good chips and salsa. Pretty much never. Let's try another. That's good. Pair with my homemade guac, fiesta. And some of you fermenters out there might ask me, could I add a different starter culture into this? Like a bit of brine from sauerkraut or fermented pickles or maybe even some yogurt whey? You could, especially if you want to try to grow something different, but you really don't need to. This is going to ferment very, very quickly. And also by just letting it do its thing, you're less likely to add any unnecessary flavors. What bacteria are you getting? And how does this compare to sauerkraut? You're getting mostly lactic acid bacteria. You might get some wild yeast, but the lactic acid bacteria dominate, so the yeast probably won't do much. Quantitative data on bacterial counts in fermented salsa is limited. It is reasonable to infer, however, that while this salsa will give you a healthy dose of probiotics, sauerkraut will have a more robust population of lactic acid bacteria. We don't ferment salsa long because it would just get mushy and will honestly taste way too tangy. So the shorter fermentation time and the higher water content in salsa will likely result in lower overall lactic acid bacteria counts. With sauerkraut, however, we have a longer fermentation time, which gives your bacteria more time to multiply. There's a lower pH that's achieved over time, which creates a stronger selective environment for the bacteria, lactic acid bacteria, and many other bacteria like pathogens and just general spoilage microbes can't survive in these low pH environments. So as your lactic acid bacteria faces less competition from other microbes, their numbers get to grow. And lastly, the structure and sugar availability of cabbage is essentially more stable and sustains lactic acid bacteria growth for longer than the high water content vegetables in salsa. So throw your salsa on some chips, on some eggs, whatever you want. But make sure if you want the full benefits of the probiotics, you do not throw these on anything hot because you'll kill them. But compared to sauerkraut, which has a much stronger flavor that a lot of people don't like, this is a great option. You don't have to worry about it going bad in your fridge, not for a very long time. Ooh, and throw some fresh cilantro afterwards, or even you can ferment the cilantro in there during, doesn't matter. If you make this, tell me how long you like to ferment it, what you like to do with it, and remember to eat real food. I'll see you next time. More salsa for me? Why, yes, thank you. Don't mind if I do.